The Velveteen Rabbit, written by Marjorie Williams and illustrated by Alan Atkinson. The Velveteen Rabbit. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking: nuts and oranges and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds and a clockwise mouse. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys made fun of him. But the rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust, like himself. The only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. He knew that they were only toys, and would never turn into anything else. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. "What does it mean having things that buzz inside of you and a little stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes," for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatsoever, she went swooping about like a great wind, hustled them away into cupboards. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog he had always slept with. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for the china dog, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here, take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes, and they had splendid games together in whispers. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under him, his chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail was becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose. Spring had come, and they had long days together in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. Nana had come to look for him with the candles because the boy was so worried about the rabbit he couldn't go to sleep unless the rabbit was safely home. He was wet through the dew and quite earthy from diving into burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed. Nana grumbled, "You must have your old bunny. Fancy all that fuss over for a toy." "Give me my bunny. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no longer a toy. He was real. The boy himself said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred inside his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there with the Velveteen Rabbit to play. And each day before the boy wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he made the rabbit a little nest among the bracken. He was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked the bunny to be comfortable. One evening the rabbit was sitting there alone watching the ants. Suddenly he saw two strange beings creep up out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back. All the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "I don't believe you can." I can jump higher than anything," he meant to say when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. He sat still in the bracken and hoped the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," and he began to laugh. I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me like this." And he began to whirl and dance around. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. "He doesn't smell right. He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. For a long time he stood very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower and the little white moths fluttered about, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he had loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining in his ears turned gray. He even began to lose his shape and scarcely looked like a rabbit at all, except to the little boy. Then one day the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the little rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night. And through it all, the little Velveteen Rabbit sat guarded and never stirred. At last the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. and one day they let him get up and dress. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in the bed must be burned. And so the little rabbit was put in a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seashore, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The flower bed, the quiet evening in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. And then a wonderful thing happened, for where the tear had fallen grew a mysterious flower, not at all like any other that grew in the garden. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just sat there watching it. Then suddenly the blossom opened, and out stepped the loveliest fairy in the whole world. "Little rabbit, do you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "You were real to the boy because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows in the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've bought you a new playfellow. You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again. "Run and play, little rabbit." And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. He actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny, and his ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. Autumn passed and winter, and in the spring, while the boy was out playing in the wood, 2 rabbits crept out and peeped at him. "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real.